"You must leave now," they both uttered with urgency. "Some men will come to kill you, and they will kill you when you are asleep." Well, the story I've chosen today is a very interesting one, and it could only happen in Africa. It's called "The Wind Dries Up the River," or "Sentenced to Death by the Chief." The wind dries up the river, leading to famine, resulting in hardship, stock loss, crop failure, starvation, and death. The first I heard of this phenomenon, item of folklore, was in the Hammanskraal district in the early 1970s. Hammanskraal is located north of Pretoria and can be accessed by the Great North Road, which leads to Zimbabwe, Rhodesia at the time. Anecdotally, the largest snouted cobra, known at that time as the Egyptian cobra, had been captured in this district. Apparently it was 11 feet long. A true monster. The thought of such a specimen sent tingles up my spine, and I knew I would be there sooner or later searching for my 11-footer. The day came. We were on a large farm near where I had treated my first snakebite victim. During breakfast a couple of years previously, the house help had called the farmer and his wife to some matter of urgency outside. I was quickly summoned. There lay a young lady in her late teens, wailing quietly on the ground under a shady tree with an impossibly tight tourniquet around her thigh. "A puff adder has bitten her on the calf," the farmer indicated in a measured voice. A very dangerous snake, responsible for many snake bites in Africa. I moved over to her and crouched at her side. 2 widely spaced fang marks were clear on her inner right calf, and a pale liquid intermingled with blood was oozing out of the fang punctures on the slightly discolored and swelling calf muscle. "I need to positively identify the snake before we use any serum," I exclaimed to the farmer. We raced to the field where she had been bitten whilst harvesting crops with a number of other farm hands. A small group had remained in the field observing the reptile while awaiting further instructions from the farmer. Well, I never caught my 11-footer in that district, ever. But that day I laid eyes on and captured the largest puff adder I had ever seen. To date, I have never seen another such massive creature of this species in South Africa. I walked up to the small circle of farmhands and followed their gaze. There it lay, playing dead, still hoping we couldn't see her. To be honest, I can't remember if it was 1.3 or 1.4 meters, but for a puff adder it was exceptional. So muscular she was almost square across her back and down her sides. A heavy chocolate brown snake with black and sandy coloured markings. Her head as large as an average hand. She had obviously fattened herself on the rodents, feeding on the yearly crop, and was probably several years old at this stage. Well, it definitely was a puff adder, and I wondered if the poor young lady could survive a bite from such a large snake. Snake in tow, we arrived back at the farmhouse. I went to work, injecting all 4 ampules of serum we had into her buttocks. This wasn't exactly the correct procedure. The injection should have been intravenous, but I was following the knowledge of the day. We raced to hospital. More serum was injected. Finally, we left her in the care of the medical staff and returned to the farm. We heard from the farmer that she had been discharged 2 weeks later without any severe after effects, and she had asked him to extend her gratitude to us for our help. In retrospect, I suspect that the snake did not inject very much venom, as both treatments, mine and the hospital's, were actually rather inadequate. Of course there was value in our treatment. It is just that the treatment could have been a lot more efficient. But in hindsight. Back to the large farm I alluded to. We had offered all the staff on the farm a small reward if they could lead us to the locality of any very large snake which we might capture, knowing full well that in that district a very large snake would most likely be a snouted or Egyptian cobra. There was no news on the first and second days, but on the third day one of the farm hands indicated there was a large snake living in a disused ant-bear hole near the river. After questioning him for some time, it appeared, based on his description, that the snake was in fact a python and not a cobra. We thought we might like to capture the python anyway. The worker was tempted by the reward we offered, but seemed reluctant to lead us to the snake. We questioned him further, hoping to persuade him, but he was unwilling. He recounted a legend which we thought interesting. It was somewhat amusing, but would come to haunt us in a deadly, surreal event a few years later. And this was to take place in another remote part of South Africa. In his broken mixture of English and Afrikaans, he told us that he could regrettably not reveal the locality of the python, even to claim his reward, as the capture of the python would be catastrophic for the region. Why is this, we inquired, now deeply curious. To capture the snake, we were told, would precipitate a great wind which would dry up the river, leading to drought. There would be no water for the cattle or the crops, and all the inhabitants of the district would suffer. We found his legend captivating, but woke up when he mentioned the remedy to the drought. To remedy the drought, he said. Yes, we inquired eagerly. The one responsible for killing or capturing the python would have to be killed. He'd have to be killed himself in order to restore the rains in the river. This would break the drought. Charming, we thought, so I guessed we wouldn't capture the python this time. A few years later, an excursion was planned near Groot Mariku, an historical locality in South Africa abounding with legends and stories. There was a homeland nearby, and my brother Charles had been invited there to visit the family of a work colleague of his, to capture some of the large snakes that abound in that remote district. He and I and 2 visiting British citizens were set to travel together on a mini safari to the homeland. Our rather long journey found us in a dusty, overgrazed, vast landscape of huts and houses, dry pans, thorn scrub and grass stubble, a real outback. We were introduced to the mother and all the family members as guests of honor. His mother was an elegant lady, elderly, well-dressed and gracious. Her modest home was spotless, even in this dusty bowl. I clearly remember the antique cabinet in her sitting room filled with beautiful china, delicate teacups, teapots and silver cutlery. We were served tea on a tray with this delicate china, and it was beautifully and unselfishly turned out for our comfort. A mix of Africa and England. I was grateful to meet this elegant lady. Even the Queen would have been taken by her elegance and her china. After tea, we were shown to our room where we prepared our sleeping bags and stored our kit. Our host then took us bushwhacking. We weren't elated, as the entire area was overgrazed and the bush sparse. It was early winter, and bleakness was the order of the day in this landscape. We were approaching a dry pan when I noticed there were many rodent burrows and mongoose burrows at the base of the thorn shrubs and trees. A good sign of a reasonably healthy ecology despite the apparent desolation, I thought. Another few meters and a movement caught my eye, quite in the open. A huge sandy yellow Egyptian cobra, sunning itself in the warm winter sun, was now attempting to sneak back to his disused mongoose burrow, hoping to escape our attention. A firm, thick-set, glistening creature over 2 meters long, quite a specimen. As this heavy and handsome creature made its way home, we easily bagged it, realizing that had we not, it would probably have met a sticky end at the hands of the cattle herders and their nopkiris, A knopkiri is, of course, a stick with a large rounded end, heavy, used for fighting and, of course, bludgeoning snakes to death. No wonder our host had asked us to visit. There were magnificent reptiles here. To honour us further, unbeknown to us, a goat had been slaughtered for our evening feast, along with an endless supply of homemade beer. Cooking the goat was not an event our English friends might have encountered in Britain. However, they were game for anything, in particular the beer. These were meat and potato men, and this evening was to be their highlight after the day's capturing events. As a large fire burnt down to the rear of the house, the coals were spread, not the coals you would expect in a suburban barbecue. This was like 50 barbecues in one. A sheet of Victorian profile corrugated iron was laid on the coals. The goat was placed on the sheet, and then a second sheet of corrugated iron was placed over the goat. More coals were then placed on top of the sheet. Our chef had now basically discharged his duties. A Gordon Ramsay event this was not. I didn't drink alcohol, and I can't remember if my brother did. The British contingent, however, was now in the pub. The African, open-air, bushveld pub. They put away the porridge-like bush brew with relish and were soon nostalgic, singing Auld Lang Syne, amongst other traditional pub songs. Presently the top sheet of corrugated iron came off the goat. The meat was perfect, cooked through, tender and aromatic. We tucked in like the starving travellers we were, and it was memorable. It wasn't late when we all passed out, some from fatigue, others from the onslaught of the beer. Perhaps an hour passed, then we woke up to the sound of the two Brits vomiting desperately somewhere nearby. I'm afraid their constitution was not prepared for the home brew, of which they had consumed so much, and the goat to boot. We comforted them in their abject misery before attempting sleep once more. It wasn't long before a very concerned face appeared in our room. Our host was looking utterly shaken and afraid. He beckoned us. We followed him outside, where he spoke to us in a hushed tone. It was now cold and after midnight. He urged a figure lurking in the dark to join us. This was a relative of his who was close to some high-ranking official, who in turn was close to the chief. "You must leave now," they both uttered with urgency. "Some men will come to kill you, and they will kill you when you are asleep." Why was the obvious reason. In brief, they explained. The area had been in a drought for some time. Word had reached the chief that these foreigners had captured a large snake near the dried-out pan. Seeking to find a reason for the drought and its remedy, he had now put two and two together, and figured out somehow we must have captured the python that had caused the drought. Of course, the drought had begun long before our arrival, but using his weak reason and seeking a scapegoat, he obviously felt that if he could pin the blame on us, he could then activate the remedy, which was to kill the ones responsible, thereby, hallelujah, restoring the rains to the district. "Go now," they urged us, becoming more animated. Our informer said that he had to leave immediately, as if he was found with us, they would kill him too. We knew enough about traditional superstition and folklore not to ignore the warning, and we were in no position to defend ourselves in any case. We had no weapons. Our saviour melted into the night. Within a very short while, we and our ghastly ill British visitors, too, melted into the night. 41 years have passed since that event. I have never returned to that region, not through fear, but through simple circumstance. I can't say I would even know how to find the blessed place. No doubt the rains came again, despite the fact that we were not dispatched to appease the gods. Folklore and legends are what they are, but don't mess with them in the wrong environment.